true for the unsaved. When the unsaved enter into the eternal lake of fire, there appears to be a revelation that verifies the fact that there's going to be varying degrees of punishment and torture for the lost. Now, I'm thankful for this passage in 2 Peter because it is one that has certainly encouraged my heart, ministered to me, and blessed me in ways that I felt as though that it would be well to share with you folk. We've come to enjoy these moments in the morning sessions together. And as we read last time, down through verse 11, once again I would like to read this passage and suggest for you that primarily in verses 3 and 4 you have the provision of God outlined, and then verses 5 through 7 the practice of the believer, and then in 8 through 11 the prospect with reference to the abundant entrance, and the preceding two thoughts are very, very important to the abundant entrance. So let me read verses 1 through 11. Now, yesterday morning, we introduced for you the first section in light of the abundant entrance of the saint of God into the presence of the Lord in verses 3 and 4. And I might say this, that some have had a little bit of difficulty with the idea of the abundant entrance into the everlasting kingdom of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, feeling as though that this might have reference to the initial point of trusting when one is saved. But the context clearly unveils for us that he's not talking about entering into that original state of abundant blessing, but it's speaking of having trusted the Lord, then a life within a prospect which is going to have a wonderful blessing as we do hear the beck and call of the Lord and enter into his eternal presence. And this I believe to be the truth of the passage, the anticipation of the believer in light of such an entrance. Now, just by way of a fast review, in verse 3 and 4, we pointed out yesterday that these two verses reveal for us the provision of God, and a marvelous provision is revealed, according as his divine power hath given unto us all things that pertain to life and godliness. Now we start out on the basis of the omnipotence of God, the all-powerful, the sovereign God of the glories. And please observe, such a one demonstrates grace, for it is mentioned here, according as his divine power has given. All right, we start out now observing that it's a provision on the basis of the grace of God with reference to what? Has given unto us all things that pertain to a life and to a life of godliness. Now this is marvelous when you stop to think of it. All that's necessary for life, either to begin life or to live life, our Father has made a wonderful provision. All things. Now, the difficulty is we don't appropriate. The fault is not with my Father. The fault is with me. But by his grace, and listen, the one who's able, he's all-powerful. Isn't that right? Now, we may desire to help one another, but we may lack the ability, isn't that right? Well, it's not such not the case with my Father. According to his divine power, he is God. He's omnipotent. And on the basis of his grace, he makes a provision for you and for me for a life and a life of godliness. Now that the provision of God and the kind of life would have. And may I suggest for you anything contrary to that hasn't come from the Lord? No, sir. Now then, there are two constructions which follow, which give to us the means. They are dia clauses in the original language, and you will observe how the Father has made these things available to us by His grace. It says now, through the knowledge of Him that has called us to glory and virtue. All right? Through the means of His Word. Now, as good as natural revelation is, and as you remember, Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth His handiwork. Day and day uttereth knowledge, and night and day and day. What is it? Now, I don't know how many times I've quoted that. From here I stop. The day and day showeth knowledge, and etc. All right. Now then, that's natural revelation. Then you come on down in that psalm, and you speak of special revelation that converteth the soul. All right. As wonderful as natural revelation is, and we live in a beautiful place of natural revelation right now. Seeing His marvelous handiwork there in Canada. And as glorious as that is, listen, that's not going to lead us into the revelation of a person. That's a manifestation of His greatness. But it's the Word of the Lord. If we are going to have a life that manifests godliness, it's not going to come through any other means than the means of the Word of the Lord that leads us unto a relationship to Him. He's the focal one. As much as we love our families, as much as we may love relatives, and have a desire for fellowship with the family of God, as wonderful these things are by His grace, yet He is to be what? The preeminent one. That in all things Christ might have the preeminence. All right. This is the first means. Now then, in verse 4, we have exactly the same construction once again. Another case of dia, whereby, or the means, which are given unto us, exceeding great and precious promises. Again, speaking of His revelation and the message of the Word of the Lord, that by these you might be partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world through lust. Now this is the great purpose of God, having made this provision of a life of godliness, that you and I might become those that would have fellowship with a divine nature. Now, as we pointed out yesterday morning, just by way of a fast review now, where it says that you might be partakers of a divine nature. Now, that word be is ginomai, and it can be translated that way, but more accurately, it relates to something coming into being which never existed before. That you and I might become something, that we might manifest something, and that is we might become those that have fellowship of a divine nature. Now that's the sphere of fellowship. And if that's the sphere of fellowship, it corresponds to this, a life of godliness. And it states there, having been liberated from the corruption that is in the world through lust. And that word lust is epithumia, which is a longing desire. Now, it's shameful, isn't it? But the lust of this world, the longing desire of this world, is that which I fear is supplanting this wonderful purpose of God, that we might become those that have fellowship with the divine nature. Now then, from this point on, having observed the provision of God and the purpose of God in that provision, now He, if I can say it colloquially, zeroes in on your responsibility and mine in the appropriating of these things, whereby we might become those that are developing the fellowship of the divine nature. Now that's found in the next three verses. So I'm going to erase this and try to take us right on in the next section and call this the practice. Verse 5 through 7, I believe. And besides this, giving all diligence, add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and to temperance patience, and to patience godliness, and to godliness brotherly kindness, and to brotherly kindness love. Now, once again, remember, the provision of God is that provision for a life, and a life of godliness. And that life of godliness, in the purpose of it, is that we might become those that would partake in fellowship of a divine nature. So now there's going to be a development of a fellowship for a divine nature. Now this is most important. In verses 5, 6, and 7, you have 7 things mentioned. And I like to suggest for you that they are 7 tremendous Christian virtues or spiritual virtues to be cultivated by the believer. The responsibility is upon you and upon me. Now, God has made them available. That's what it says in verse 3. All things. All things. Now then, you and I have a responsibility. And this smacks right across a philosophy of today. And that is it. So much has been bestowed that we have a feeling, well, why do anything? We've never had it so good. Let's just sit back and let it come. Let it come. Let it come. And it's shameful. But God will take us to a point in the spiritual life and then place a responsibility on us to appropriate a provision whereby we might be blessed in the spiritual life. And that's what's before us. Now I know that you will recall in Galatians chapter 5 the fruit of the Spirit. There, it's a 9-fold precious facet. Now, it does not, that fruit of the Spirit does not in any way, shape, or form violate what is before us. Instead, it just simply supplements it. But we are saved by grace, and we have a life by grace. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the practical practice of the spiritual life, it requires work. It requires some diligence. God has given it to us. Now then, he says, appropriate. As an illustration, we may, for our families, we may make certain purchases for them. For instance, we were just discussing this matter over at the house. Up there, we've got about 3 feet of snow and etc. And this year, we all 5 of us finally got decked out in a snowsuit. It's rather important up in that area to have this kind of apparel. And I've been a little bit reluctant to see Lila constantly every Sunday evening go out and pick up people. She's driving that crate of ours, and we got 3 feet of snow on the ground, and it's maybe 10, 15 below zero. And if something happens, well, now she's going to have to get up and walk. And so I want her to be in proper apparel. And so we, this year, after about 3 or 4 years, we all have a snowsuit. And Stephen bought Becky one for Christmas. Now, he made the provision, isn't that right? He bought it for her. But what's she got to do? She got to don it, isn't that right? She got to put it on. It's a sure seat Stephen wouldn't put it on her. Not his sister, absolutely not. And in fact, this was the first year he even allowed his sisters to come up and put her arms around him and thank him for his gifts. Of course, this is a brother-sister relationship, to be sure. But we have lots of fun. But here, the Lord makes the provision. Now he just simply tells you and tells me, get to work. This is the book of James. What does it say? Beginning with verse 5. And beside this, start doing something. Giving all diligence. Now, I'd like to emphatically share with you what is there in verse 5. Now, bringing everything with diligence. Making all diligence. And this is one of the strongest words I know of where it says here, giving all diligence. That is just does not do justice to that word. You know, there are 3 Greek words all jammed together here to make one Greek word. And when you've got a construction like that, pharaoh, which means to bear, ace, which means into, and then para, alongside, when you've got those 3 words and put them all together, they change the meaning, to be sure, but they make the meaning terrifically emphatic. Now, to illustrate, many of you are parents here this morning, and you might say, now, Billy, I want you to hang up your clothes. Now, by the tone of your voice, Billy knows what he means by that. Now, if you say, Billy, hang up your clothes. Oh, now, she may mean that. Did you hear me, Billy? You hang up those clothes. She meant it. Emphatically. 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 Emphatically now. God says now giving or bringing into all diligence. What is diligence? Well, diligence isn't just being haphazard, is it? Diligence is giving strict attention and effort to something. Bringing all diligence into what? Add something. Get to work. Do it. Appropriate. God has made the provision. Now appropriate. Appropriate what? Here it is. On the basis of that which has been ours. He doesn't say add faith, does he? No, sir. But to start from it. On that bedrock. Faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God, and that's how we're saved. For by grace are you saved through faith. Now on the basis of faith, now then start adding. And you know, there are 7 things. Right on down to 7. The very first thing that I'm to add to the life that has been given to me by God is a virtue that He's already made a provision for me, because it relates to a spiritual character. All right? Add to your faith. What? Virtue. That's the first thing. What is virtue? Well, we can take our dictionaries and etc. and look them up, and I spent a little time with each one of these words just to try to get a fuller meaning for us. We have pretty much of an idea by virtue of our vocabulary what each one of these words mean. But in my Greek lexicon we have the meaning something like this: superior moral excellence. Moral excellence. Boy, if there was ever a day that this virtue needs to be cultivated, it's now. And this is one of the things that's going to tear our country to pieces. And it's not only going to tear our society to pieces, but amazing as it may seem, if this does not become a greater reality among the family of God, the testimony of Jesus Christ is going to be blasphemed among the Gentiles. And for this reason, those of us who are believers, we simply cannot take our standards from the world. When God tells us in Romans 12:1 or 2 to do something, we must, absolutely must, heed what he says. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, wholly acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service, and be not conformed, literally fashioned to what? This age. But constantly be being transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may be able to prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. They have a little fun with me up there at Northland, but so far they haven't with me. They try it, but we have a few little standards, and I don't think they're nearly as rugged as they should be, if you want to know how I feel. But my, they gripe about it, and they just grunt and groan to be to that. Well, we require that the girls' dresses must be for their names, period. And the boys must have a haircut. And so to really help things out in a real way this fall, one of my students returning from Colorado, his brother is married to my niece, and so he likes to have some fun with me. He's just a real swell boy, and he's really developed this year. That kid came back to school this fall. You know how he came? He came with the finest afro you ever saw in your life. He's a blonde-headed kid, and his hair is just as kinky and curly as possible. And he came in there with a haystack just like that. Well, he got there, so I couldn't ship him off to the barber. And so Sunday, when I introduced the students and the returning students, and I'm glad to have one from the dark continent of Africa, and old Tim stood up. And I said, enjoy it, because Tuesday's registration, and then, brother, it's all gone. And, you know, they had lots of fun with me because Tuesday was a holiday and all the barber shops were closed. So he kept it for another day. Well, they're very good. They heed the standards, but they have a lot of fun teasing with it. So I am with it. But if it goes a little bit too long, and I get a little definite, why then they know I brought emphasis and I go to get it done. But listen, you'd be surprised the trouble that I have with parents about this. You know that? And I can get along fine with kids because they'll do it. But it's the Christian parents that give me the axe. They don't want their dear little Billy or Susie to be out of style. And I want to tell you something. Our styles are not created for moral excellence. Now God says, for you and for me, on the basis of our faith, we are to cultivate and enlarging it for a life of godliness, partaking, sharing in the fellowship of a divine nature. And we are to cultivate moral excellence. Right? it's amazing that he would start out with that very one. He doesn't start out with love, does he? Love is what ends it. But he starts out with that, which is one of the most devastating tools of human nature. Now, God has created us as we are. And he has created us to function as we are in his will. The sad thing about it is society has cultivated the corruption of lust. That's what we've been liberated from. And unless our society does something about it, which I don't think it's going to, it's going to crumble, just like all of the other great world empires have crumbled. The sad thing about it, where is the restraint in the household of faith? Only just by a few who will dare take this wonderful grace of God and make the provision for it. It's through the wonderful promises of the Lord. The more you get into the Word, the more your life is conformed unto Him, why the more these things are going to find a depreciation by way of emphasis in life and be used in their proper God-created function. Now, it's honorable in the marriage bond. We're told that. It's right. But outside of that, it's corrupt. All right. Now then, to the faith, take that wonderful spiritual virtue, which is going to corral the lust and the appetite, and add this to that life, moral excellence. Now, to moral excellence, what does it say? Virtue, knowledge. Now, if faith and if virtue are going to blossom, they've got to blossom with something that is not revised, something that has a firm standard, and that is through knowledge, which is not knowledge as such as we know knowledge, but it looks at the gain of understanding of revelation. That's how it's used here. So, I'm not left up just to becoming an Einstein or to be educated as an intellectual of my day, but I am to become an intelligent understander, if I can put it that way, of his revelation. And I'm to give all diligence. And you know, if we would be just as diligent in the study of our Bibles as we are with our jobs, as we are with our recreation, as we are with maybe some of our hobbies, well, I tell you, it'd be fantastic, wouldn't it? But what do we do when it comes to the matter of the Word of the Lord? Well, if we have time, and if we feel right, and if I don't have to go there, or if I don't have to do this, well, I'll be good. When we start to take inventory, is it any wonder that we have so many problems? With reference to the spiritual life I'm talking about. Not the opposition of persecution. I'm talking about our own spiritual lives. Because we don't appropriate the provision that God has made. He's given us the revelation, hasn't he? Well, we can buy this book for 35 cents. And if people don't have it, someone be willing to give it to them. No, I tell you, this is wonderful, because a ladder has many rungs. They're individual rungs, but it makes up one ladder. And if you and I are going to appropriate a stature whereby we can fellowship with the divine nature, we've got to take each one of the rungs on the spiritual ladder. And it's all one. All right, now then, adding to knowledge of the word of the Lord, add what? Temperance. Now, what is temperance? Well, this Greek word temperance is hupomone. And this is one of the most delightful words that the Lord gave to me a number of years ago in the study of the Greek New Testament. The word hupomone means patiently enduring. Or it relates to endurance. That which has been built up. And I like to, as you've heard me on other occasions, use the illustration how that in the springtime of the year in our high schools, we usually have the time when they have track and field meets. Well, in order for one to turn in a successful and credible demonstration for the field meet, there's lots of training that has to go in. And when you first start to train, you get out and run around that track. And the next day you are so stiff and sore, you can hardly move. And the coach said, not only 10 laps tonight, but 15. Well, you can hardly creak out the first 3 or 4 until you get limbered up. And then before long, you're making 20 laps. What are you doing? You're building up physical endurance, building up your endurance. God says, adding to knowledge, add some spiritual endurance. And this is in keeping with our evening ministry, and we're not going to get the chance to turn to it or deal with it. So I'm going to ask you to hold your hand here in 2 Peter chapter 1 and turn back with me to Romans 5. Romans 5. Because in the 5th chapter of the book of Romans, we have a portion of the Word which unveils to us how spiritual endurance is built up in a real way. Now in Romans 5, and you and I are not going to like this, but it's here. Therefore, being justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, by whom also we have access by faith into this grace, wherein we stand and rejoice in hope of the glory of God. And not only so, but we glory in tribulations, or trials also. You see what's that? This is glory. We rejoice, you see. Knowing that what? Tribulation works what? Same Greek word. Trials, difficulties produce spiritual endurance. Now it tells us over here in 2 Peter chapter 1, along with this wonderful provision of God in light of the Word, now he says, in the practical spiritual life, you add to the Word of the Lord spiritual endurance, which will sure come your way if you'll start studying the Word and being conformed to it. Now let it have its perfect and complete work. Add to it, because this involves the fellowship of the divine nature. Now then, excuse me, I missed one there, didn't I? It's temperance that we're to add to knowledge. Patience comes to temperance. Now, let me back up just a little. Add to your virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance first. Now, temperance is a word that I'm not too sure is too good by way of translation in this verse. Actually, it is this. And to knowledge, add self-control. Self-control. That's actually what the Greek word is here, self-control. And what does self-control mean? Well, self-control relates to that person who isn't going to simply fly apart all the time. He's one that has a maturity about him, that he can hold his temper, and that he can hold manifesting his feelings and etc., and carry on in a credible, mature manner of life. Now, you know, some of us have some real difficulty along this line. The reason being that some of us have had everything done for us, whereby we have not had to assume personal responsibility. Now, this is quite a change for young people. And this is the reason in the teenage bracket of life, young people have such a vicious cycle to go through. For a while, the children are controlled by the parents, isn't that right? They are told what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. The provisions are made for them. Then when they get a little bit older, you see that will begin to come out, don't you? A self-will. Now then, the control upon those children, it takes on a different approach. You'd like to turn them over your lap and really tan their hides, but they're just too. Therefore, you have to approach it from a different point of view. Well, the kids then are beginning to realize that they can do things, and they are full of life and vim and vigor, and they're just a place where their brain is working a little bit more than they think their moms or dads are working. And they have a terrible time. And so, in order to prove that they are a man or a woman, and do some very foolish things, as later on in life they look back and say, wasn't that silly? Well, they are not in control of themselves. And it isn't until they can mature out of that cycle that they can begin to see where they need to control certain areas of their thinking, their habits, attitudes, and etc. Now, the Bible says this. As far as knowledge is concerned, you and I need to add to that some spiritual maturity. Spiritual maturity where there is self-control, spiritually speaking, that we can pass some spiritual judgment with reference to our lives. And this is the proper place for temperance, because it follows knowledge, doesn't it? It follows the standard, and on the basis of the standard which is given to us, then we are to be able to pass judgment upon ourselves and decide intelligently before the Lord certain pathways to walk and how to live. It's very, very important. But I'll tell you, if we don't have a system of education today, if we don't have a system of biblical education which will lead a young person into the Word of the Lord, then their self-control, or they're going to control themselves on the basis of a judgment which they have. And if it isn't biblically saturated, what's the foundation for their thinking? What is it? They're going to control themselves, direct their wills in that which is basically theirs. And you and I have an awesome responsibility, and I can't emphasize this more and testify to you that When young people come to Northland Bible College, I feel an awesome responsibility. I have a terrific responsibility, first of all, before the Lord, that I'm faithful to those kids. Secondly, I have a tremendous responsibility to that young person as a maturing person, realizing that they may still be in the areas of change. And I recognize a responsibility to the home that they come from, because that home has entrusted their child to my care. Isn't that right? They certainly have. And I feel a responsibility. And then next, I feel a very definite responsibility to the place that they have come from by way of their church or spiritual emphasis. Sometimes we have young people come to us that I could not necessarily agree with wholeheartedly, but to the area that I can agree with, well, I feel I have a faithfulness to that degree. Because I've been entrusted with God's property, and woe be to me if I don't handle God's property God's way. So, I want to give to them a proper basis for them to be able to make proper judgments by the Spirit of God to live the life of fellowship according to a divine nature. And if I can accomplish that by the grace of God, then I feel as though I fulfilled my obligation, and trust that you'll pray for me to this end. Because that's most important. And I have some strong convictions that it's the Word of God that does the job. It's not all of this business you run into in the world. My heart aches with reference to much of the education that our kids are subjected to today. Because when they get out, what's the basis for reason? Just as I was talking to Stephen when he was in grade 12. Of course, we had 13 grades up there. As we were going to town, I said, Steve, he brought up the discussion. I said, now I'm not going to try to be the will of God for your life, but I'm going to counsel you as my son, just like I would counsel any other young person. But first of all, I want to ask you a question. I notice that you're having to write a number of papers on commons in your history course. I said, is the class pretty well sold on that system? He said, Daddy, that's true. I said, how about your teacher? He's sold on it too. I said, how about you, Steve? Why, I said, no. I said, I see the fallacy. I said, well, what about those other kids? He said, well, Daddy, the reason that they're sold on it is, you see, they don't have a basis for reason. I do. Now, I thought that was pretty good coming from a kid. A basis for reason. And then I went on to explain to him that I felt as though he ought to cultivate that basis for reason to such an extent that later on, when I passed off the scene, and Daddy and Mommy passed off the scene, and out of the influence, the control of their lives, as far as our children, that they would have a good basis for them self-control in the path of life. Now that may be a little different approach than we've heard before, but that's exactly what he's telling us to do here. To knowledge, add to that, actually, the simple application of that knowledge, of the word of the Lord, for myself. And then, of course, as it goes on, which we've already discussed, the matter of self-control, add to that spiritual endurance, as we suggested. That happens to be the area of the practical outworking of it, whereby that you're going to be mature. Now then, to that, add godliness. Isn't that lovely? He has provided for us all things that pertain to what? Life and godliness. In other words, taking the all things of the grace of God as revealed in the Word of the Lord and cultivate it. That's all in the Word of it is. What we're supposed to do? Giving all diligence to it. Not taking it as a convenience, but putting some real backbone effort. And if we don't, where is it going to be the God of our faith? It's not going to be there. Instead, it may be a pious testimony